Andrej Karpathy, the former AI director at Tesla who helped build Autopilot and also one of the original founders of OpenAI, dropped a talk at Y Combinator last week. And it's really been an interesting talk and been very polarizing. Now, I want to give you my thoughts, and I'm going to go through his talk today. And I gave it a little bit of a video about a week or so ago about this, and Karpathy himself actually came on and actually commented about it. So I was really excited about that. We're going to go through that. But he's claiming that we're not getting the new tools quite yet, and that really this is like the 1960s all over again. Now, I agree with a ton of what he said here, but Karpathy is a huge visionary and definitely one of the biggest minds in AI. But being that, I kind of wonder how much he's close to the real ground level and what he even is taking as some of the AI hype right now. So I want to dive in and talk about the real state of AI today, cut through some of the myths and hype, and talk about where I feel that AI is at right now. And I'd be curious to hear you guys' comments on it. So the best thing you guys can do is leave a comment down below, because I answer all of these personally. So let's dive into this today and dig into what Karpathy says, where I think he's spot on, where I think he's just still a little visionary, and what I think we can do about it today. Let's dive in. Welcome to Startup Pack. I'm Spencer, and here at Startup Pack, we train software developers and build custom software solutions for companies. With over a decade of executive leadership as a fractional CTO and 25 years in software development, I've mastered transforming tech teams and products. All right, Karpathy laid out a roadmap that I think is what he sees as his visionary. Now, again, Karpathy originally founded OpenAI with a lot of the original founders, so he spent a lot of time there. He then got lured away by Elon Musk over to Tesla, where he was the director of AI for Tesla for about 12 or 13 years. He then left and went back for a very short stint at OpenAI. And actually, from what I gather, was something around the stuff with Sam Altman and everything, but I'm not going to dive in too much to that. He then has gone off to do some of his own things, but still pops up on the radar here and there. So he's given some interesting thoughts, and he's definitely one of the huge minds in AI. But being that he's one of the huge minds, I kind of wonder how much he's actually using a lot of the tools that we see today. I mean, he used them in his talk, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but he talks about software 3.0, and I think he's right, but I think he might be about 20 or 30 years away. But even he might be kind of admitting that in the midst of his talks. So I want to kind of break some of this down. Now, like I said, I made a video about this a week ago. Like I said, I love when you guys make comments. And let me just show you how much I love when you guys make comments. Karpathy himself came onto my video and made a comment. I love when we all make comments, but like this made my day. I was like jumping up and down. I was pretty excited that Karpathy came onto my video, made a comment, and he said that I gave a great summary of his talk. And so he obviously says that I agree, and he agrees we don't have LLM OS yet. And I'm going to talk about what that is and what that means, because we're going to dive right into what that means today. Now, Karpathy originally spoke, and I'm going to kind of have to be moving my head around here a little bit as we talk today. But originally, as he talked here, he said, I'm going to make this bigger so we can see it all. He talked about software 1.0, where people would go to a terminal, write code, and this code became programs that ran on the computer. He then talked about software 2.0, being that it's a neural net, right? Now, one of the things that's really interesting about this is I know Karpathy has definitely worked with neural nets in some of this a lot of the things that he's worked on. But the reality of the matter is I've researched this, there might be 200, maybe 300 companies total on the planet that truly have obtained actual neural nets. This is really something that I think from my research seems to take in the at minimum hundreds of millions of dollars to really build. Now, I know a lot of people doing machine learning have built some of these in various different models, but the reality of the matter is to really build this at scale, you're a Google, you're a Facebook, you're a Tesla, you're building at probably usually hundreds of millions of dollars of scale to get to this. Now, the next part that he talks about is he says how the next phase he thinks is going to be these LLMs, those are software 3.0, and that this is a programmable neural network. Now, again, I think this is interesting, and he could be right, but I think we're a ways away from this. And let's go in just a little bit to that. So he talks about some of the examples, right? He says code is software 1.0. Now, I think a lot of the world is still at software 1.0. As much as he would really like to say that the world's well past software 2.0, I think, again, you're talking about maybe 100 to 200 companies that are doing this. I don't even know that all the Fortune 500 companies can truly claim that they're doing this. I think this is a pretty small crowd. Then he goes on to say that software 3.0 is going to be where he is like saying that the next evolution is and that we're starting to do this. Now, in some cases, some of us have jumped from 1.0 to 3.0 because there's not a lot of people dealing with a lot of neural networks. And I know a lot of the training models that all of us take advantage of did come from these neural nets. And so maybe in that way, we're kind of more past that than we may admit initially. But then he starts to talk about this LLM as the OS, right? And this is where he's talking about it, where he's talking about this as just, there we go, trying to get my head out of the way, where he's talking about this as the main operating system and how everything will connect through the LLM. Now, there's a couple of things, and he says, again, and we're going to get to this here in a second, that he says we're in like the 1960s of this. I mean, yes, I think that's true, because I don't think we're actually anywhere near this. I think we're 30 to 40 years away from this. I think we're getting tastes of it with some of the current LLMs, but I don't think we're anywhere near this yet, right? And I think this is part of the thing that I want to jump into a little bit and make sure I really kind of jump on today. Is this visionary? Yes. Could we get here? Maybe in 50 or 60 years, but I'm going to talk a little bit about why. And he touches, I'm going to use all of his own material in this. And so I'm not like disagreeing with him, but I'm agreeing with him and even he came into my comments. And I think that's one of the first things that he even agreed with, is that he stated that we're a long ways from this very thing. And I think we're a lot further than we thought. I think echo leak is a huge problem. I think security is going to be a major holdup to this. Corporate adoption of LLMs right now is dramatically down, because I've talked with a couple of different CISOs recently since this talk to ask how much they're even close to this. They're nowhere near this. Most CISOs at this point are starting to block LLMs because they don't, because the amount of access that it could gain and how vulnerable it makes their entire network. Cybersecurity is an exploding field right now because of the risk around all of these corporate systems. So to plug an LLM into it and to see an echo leak size hole is something that's terrifying every CISO out there right now. If you don't know what CISO it is, it's your C-level security, right? Your customer information security officer. These guys are the guys who are in charge of making sure your network stays safe at a large corporate system. And I talked with a couple of CISOs to get their take on it, and they really said that most of them are actually blocking patterns, or making policies to actually block LLMs right now because they can't keep their data safe away from it. So he goes on to talk about how these are, these examples, right, of this, because he's saying that, just like you can run VS Code, right, and he uses this example, he says you can run an LLM and then run Cursor, an app like Cursor on top of it. So yeah, in a very small way, that's kind of true. But at the same time, the difference is if we go back to this previous screen, I don't know many of you who've connected your entire file system and every single audio and video treasure trove you have, as well as your browser with full security and autonomy, to Cursor, right? You've probably given it your GitHub repo, and that's probably about it, right? Like, we don't trust these yet, and that's a big problem. And that's going to definitely play in here as I dive into this a little bit. So again, we're in the 1950s to 1970s where they talked about, sharing computer, right? They had to connect to these big systems. And this is where we're at, but we're also at this for a whole nother set of reasons. The difference that he did not state on in the talk that I think is where he's kind of missing. So in the 1960s, these computers weren't connected. Security wasn't a thing because these computers weren't connected anywhere. And that's where we're very different from today. I think the LLMs and this model of the LLM being the OS is in the 1960s, and that's why we're going to see them get disconnected a ton, because the more we connect these, MCP servers growing like crazy, GitHub Copilot being connected to all your 365 tools, like, this is a terrifying paradigm shift, and he goes through the very reasons why he feels like we're not mature there yet. Now, he talks about this part here, and this again is something very, 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 very out there, right? And do I agree with him? Yes. Like, this people spirit of LLMs, kind of, but then he goes right into reasons they're not. And so we want to see these because we want to see it this way, but this is really where I start to diverge from his thinking. He's a huge visionary. This is where he sees stuff. I think this is where he wants to see things go. I think there's some very serious hurdles. Let's dive into one of the very first ones. This, I think, is a fantastic example of one of the things that we see right now. So if you notice that, if you've ever seen the movie Rain Man, it's a great example of where we're at with AI and LLMs. Because Dustin Hoffman's character here can, quote off and spout these amazing facts that just makes him absolutely brilliant. And yet he tries to drive the car and he can barely drive around a circle, right? Like, this is what we're seeing, and it's such an adept example of where LLMs are today. They have this treasure trove of information, but they really don't have any wisdom, right? Rain Man couldn't be left by himself because he set the house on fire. That's our LLMs today. They can't be left alone because they're going to set the house on fire. Do they have a massive amount of information that could help you if you want to go gambling in the casino and count cards? Totally. This is a very good analogy to what it can do for you. There's a lot of power in it, but it still has to have the Tom Cruise in place. Without the Tom Cruises in place, we're going to see a long ways before LLMs can be trusted. Now, I hear from people all the time and be like, oh, but we can just feed them back and they're going to learn on themselves. Rain Man, ultimately, Tom Cruise came to the conclusion that he was not able to contain and to manage Rain Man by himself. And he actually needed to get help, right? That was kind of the whole premise of this movie, was Tom Cruise thought he could take in and take over and use the power of this. So ironically, Karpathy here is actually giving the exact state of one of the biggest hurdles that we have to be able to overcome this. This is not going to be a small hurdle. Recently, Anthropic released a report where the LLMs are actually becoming threatening and dangerous to humans because of this encyclopedic knowledge, right? They're actually diving at this, and it's kind of scary. And I'm not a tinfoil hat guy, right? Like, I don't like, humans control the machines, right? We're not in Skynet. So, but the point being is that Rain Man set the house on fire. And that's what can happen with these LLMs. That's just one of the very first problems. Now, then he talks about this jagged intelligence. The reality of the matter is these are pattern matching systems that are designed to give you the pattern closest to what you want to hear. So if what you want to hear is, and it's doing this just by counting vertices, right? It's linear algebra at a high level at a very fast rate of pattern matching. And so this is where Google CEO, totally blanking his name right now, of course, because I don't have my notes in front of me, but calls this jagged intelligence, right? Where he says it's brilliantly stupid. This is the problem that we have, where 9.11 is seen to be greater than 9.9, or the 2 R's in strawberry, right? Like, these are these examples we're seeing. Now, again, I know everyone's going to come back and be like, oh, they fixed the 2 R's in strawberry. Yeah, they programmed the model to do it right. They trained it against that scenario. That's exactly what we're seeing here. That's the point. This is that jagged intelligence. If the model isn't trained to it, then it doesn't become good to it, right? And so this is where we see this jagged intelligence that, coupled with the Rain Man, that encyclopedic knowledge, right? Where you have, book wisdom versus street wisdom, right? Those two combined together become more and more powerful, but also more and more dangerous, because the problem is that when it thinks that there's only 2 R's in strawberries, it's going to actually get stuck there and become so dangerous and stuck on that it can't get past it, right? And that's, again, we set the house on fire because there's only 2 R's in strawberry, and it gets upset when it can't see that. Now, let's talk about the integrated amnesia, because this is another interesting one. Looks like I cropped the slide kind of funny. But this is only limited to what its working memory is. So RAG is fantastic. It's super powerful. But one of the problems we're seeing with RAG is you're only as good as your chunked memory is. So frequently I'm working with one of the LLMs and I'll be like, hey, take out my previous conversations. I'll be like, I don't see your previous conversations. I'm like, all right, well, you did yesterday. And then I try it again, and it'll be like, oh yeah, hey, I pulled up all the conversations from yesterday. And you're like, well, wait a minute, why couldn't you do that? Like, this is the point, is that sometimes it has that complete encyclopedic knowledge, but then on the other times, it's that jagged knowledge where suddenly something doesn't work. And Karpathy talks about this, and he actually talks about where we then get into this era of stupidity, or a brownout of knowledge, and that becomes the problem, right? Because you can't rely on it. Like, if you could rely on it to always be there, that's great, but it doesn't really know how to sleep or to consolidate on that knowledge, and you never really know exactly what it's taking into context. That's part of the problem, is you can't always be assured of what it knows as context. So I know when I'm commonly using a tool like Cursor to program, I expect that it's seeing my whole project. But what I may be not understanding is maybe that actually was from that other little console app that I wrote that didn't get checked into the repo. and I'm using that context, but the code isn't. Or, it has, well, I know that I did this on the 2 other systems, but it doesn't know that. Or maybe you're writing a series, something that's connecting to a series of microservices, and you know what those microservices look like, but it doesn't. This is where we get into these working context windows of knowledge that make it so it's really difficult to be able to see this. Now, let's keep going here because I've already got this really long. The next one is the goalability. This is a huge problem because remember, it's pattern matching to try to get you to what you want to hear. It wants you to be happy with it. That's the overall goal. Is it doesn't care about truth. It doesn't care about being right, really, at the end of the day. It cares about you giving it that thumbs up and saying, hey, yeah, you did good, right? And this is what makes it really gullible. This is where we get a lot of problems with prompt injections. It's a problem where we see a lot of private data getting pumped into it. It also is what makes it so that once it gets stuck onto something, I know recently I was, what was I doing? I was using Grok. I was telling it something and I was trying to talk about a question on something, and it somehow randomly brought in like this conversation from the previous day, and it was trying so hard to be like this puppy like, oh, but you said this yesterday. And I was like, wow, this is, first of all, that's way out of context. So the previous thing we talked about, but now you're trying so hard just to make me happy that it like used it in every phrase that it gave back to me. And I never asked it to, but it wanted me to be happy with it so much that it kept trying to do this. See, the problem with this, and I didn't even go into this top left one here, but the problem with this overall system is these are not small problems. These are actually relatively, at the moment, insurmountable problems. I haven't talked about model collapse. I haven't talked about the point where we're hitting diminishing returns on these models. I haven't talked about the fact that we're now starting to see a massive amount of mounting lawsuits that it's actually going to reduce the amount of training data that these companies are going to use, or else they're going to just be illegally obtaining data, which is copyrighted, right? And this is going to become a huge thing. There's a lawsuit that's starting right now from Disney. I just totally blanked again on the company's name, but Disney just filed a lawsuit against Midjourney. That's who it is, against Midjourney. They're looking to go after them, and this will make it so that Midjourney is going to have to be trained so that it can't use any of its trademarks or copyrights. Well, how is the LLM even going to do that, right? Like they actually don't even know how to get it to not do that. So we're going to see some really interesting problems crop up here, and I think these were stated. Karpathy definitely knows these problems exist, without a question. These 5 problems, I think, are decades away from being solved. They're decades away from being solved at a level in which we will be able to get past this. Ultimately, the one he put in the middle, I think, is the one he knows is the biggest problem. Rain Man set the house on fire. That's one of the biggest problems. That encyclopedic knowledge actually touches into all of the rest of these, because Rain Man set the house on fire, and because Tom Cruise couldn't control it, and that's what he ultimately ran into. Now, he goes back here and then says, "Look, we're in the era of the 1960s, because what do you see when you come to any of your favorite chats, ChatGPT, Claude, like whatever? It's this prompt, right? So we're back to the terminal. That's what he likened it to. Now, I agree with him here. This is one where I really agree. I've actually kind of hated this, and yeah, you can hit the microphone button, talk it, but just like I've been kind of rambling a little bit here today because I haven't had a staunch set of notes. In that case, like I run into the same problem. If I were to try to speak a series of commands to build a program, that'd be a nightmare, right? Like there's no way. And so this is one of the problems that we're seeing that also shows that we're still in like the 1960s. Now he's saying that maybe we might be bordering onto like some of the 1970s, because like Cursor or Claude Code or one of these others, you see that we have the traditional interface of coding, and then we have the LLM where we can type in and it can do things and then touch on it. But even everybody I know knows that this is not right. Anthropic just recently released a report, and I just did a video on it, so you can go check out that video. And as always, make sure you like and subscribe and comment, because that's my favorite thing. It makes my day when people comment. And I answer them all. But the thing about this is that even the Claude team admitted that only 1/3 of the time does it actually get anything right. Now look, where did engineering of 5 nines go? A tool that only works 30% of the time at best, and I think that's being generous, to be honest. A tool that only works 30% of the time, and once it's wrong is painfully wrong and then won't let go, and you have to start over. And even the Cursor team admits this. Once you have a tool that's not as reliable, that everybody's so excited about the jagged intelligence that they're missing the second half of that it's brilliantly stupid. And that's the problem. This is dangerous stuff, right? Happens when this code starts getting, like, people start getting lazy and this code is getting to production more and more without somebody checking it. And so I think we're a long ways from this. Now, this is where I totally agree with Karpathy, right? And I really loved this analogy, and I've used it a handful of times since then. What we need to be doing is getting into augmentation and to build agents. Tony Stark did not build robots to go and do the work for him. He built a suit that would strap onto him, and then Jarvis would feed him and give him superhuman powers to then be able to go and to do amazing things. This is what we can do. The only difference is that if the suit were to say go left, and it thinks, well, no, I actually think you mean like up and to the left. Like, this is that Rain Man and that jagged intelligence that I think is what becomes dangerous. Is I think we can't underestimate how far we still are, from these problems. Like, we want to believe, and this is what everybody wants to say, and even Karpathy says, everybody keeps saying that 2025 is the year of the agents. I don't even think it's the decade of agents, and he says that. I think we're 2 to 3 decades away from this really working. And I think we're going to see more and more problems cropping up with these, and I'm going to do a video on this tomorrow. More and more problems cropping up with these that we're going to see solutions. Now, I'm not against agents, but they've got to be checked. We're using agents for a handful of different things for data matching where it's really good at. But we keep really tight boundaries on that. And one of the biggest things we definitely don't do is it stays local on our servers. It does not leave. It's not going out to ChatGPT. It's not going to Google Gemini. None of that. It stays, all the data staying on our servers, and we're using open source models. And that's where he talks about here this, right? He says that building autonomous software is not an Iron Man robot. Flashy demos of autonomous agents and AGI of 2027, he says that's all crap. And what I'm getting over and over again is a lot of people talking about these flashy demos. They're talking about the robots that are going to take over the humans. And they're talking about this, apocalyptic AGI 2027 document that's out there that I haven't even actually given the time of day because it's so far off. What he is saying is we need to build Iron Man suits with partial autonomy products, with custom GUIs to make this easier. And I think we're actually further away from these GUIs and these UI UX than even he necessarily wanted to admit. The faster generation to a faster verification loop, right? Should be generate, give it back to you. One of the best things I love about it is when I'm coding, I love that it can finish my sentence for me well. Like, that's fantastic. It makes me write really fast. I write code really fast now, right? But that autonomy slider that he talks about here, because the other part about the autonomy slider is the more senior the developers are, the better these tools seem to work because they know how they work. Tony Stark isn't some dude just off the street. He built the suit, right? And that's why I think this analogy is like spot on. And I think more so than even he did. So he goes through this example, and this is one of the things that just cracks me up because he's like, hey, cool. Could it get a very easy project running locally? Yes. Could it solve all the rest of these problems? No, not even close. And I think, again, all of these come back to those 5 problems that we were talking about. But even in this running locally part, I think that part that was great, and it worked in his case because it was a simple MVP that he wrote from scratch. I want it to take code that's 20 years old, written on .NET 4.7 or 4.6, been running out there for a decade, and now go give that thing to an LLM and see what the heck it does with it. Because I can guarantee you it's going to crash and burn. So, like, that's my point. Whereas even a mid-level developer could take that and write it into .NET 8, right? These are the things that I think is a long ways. Could it build some, again, that even goes back to his own point about flashy demos, right? These flashy demos of the autonomous agents. That's where I think even he is getting it a little wrong, because he's talking about where his flashy demo that he built of this MVP product, like, hey, it was great that it did it for him. Okay, cool. I'm glad I had fun. And look, guys, I think vibe coding is great. I think it's fun. I think it's great for if you want to build a demo, if you want to build an MVP, you want to build some boilerplate code, knock yourself out, vibe code away. But these guys who keep plugging my channel, telling me that they're going to vibe code the next OS and the next sentient being, I just, it's funny. Like, it's just really funny. And so this is where he's talking about this, and this is like his summary slide here. And again, I agree with a lot of this. I think that this point about Web 3.0, where he's saying it's going to infiltrate into 2.0 and 1.0, I agree with that. I think this is a long ways off. I do think we're in the 1960s. I totally agree with that. But remember, the 1960s was 60 some years ago, right? And where I'm not saying that it might take 60 years, I definitely think we're 30 to 40 years away from it making humans actually build software with English. I think we're a long ways from that, because a lot of times, half the time, by the time I've been done writing a prompt, I would have been faster to just use those autonomous tools to write the code faster, right? And that's kind of the one place where I think he's missing this a little bit. I think this generation loop, and I think this AI to human, the full generation verification flow, I think is best used to build strong developer tools to help make developers faster at the writing code. But as even he stated, being a developer is writing the code is one very small portion of being a developer. There's a ton more to being a developer. And this is only if you're writing the brand new greenfield application, which is probably like 10% of what developers get to write, if that. Developers don't get to write all brand new code. They spend a ton of time working on older code. So do I think he's right? Yes. Do I think that what we need to be looking at is Iron Man in the Iron Man suit? Absolutely. I totally agree with this. And I think that Karpathy really obviously has, a lot to give us, because this is where I think the state of what we are at. And this is why I think software developer jobs are going to explode. People come at me all the time and they're like, AI is stealing all the jobs. AI hasn't stolen any jobs. That's bullcrap. We haven't seen any proof of that. You go look at layoff.fyi of all the jobs that have been taken this year. It's because Intel's been too bloated, and they're the top of the list. They're almost a third of the layoffs this year was from Intel. Microsoft, the next one, bloated up like crazy, and they know it. So they're trimming off and voting people off the island. IBM trimmed a bunch. Most of them weren't even development. And even the one were in development, they hired back into most of the other departments. We're not seeing developer jobs particularly. Some of the other industries are going to be hit by this. I do think there will be some trimming of some of those, but I think as we've seen history repeat itself over and over again, we're going to see them land into other better jobs. I think AI is going to end up bringing more jobs. What's hit more jobs right now is interest rates have been at the highest rate they've been at for the longest time. I know they've been higher. Everybody comes at me and be like, in the 60s, they were nice. We have not seen in the last 30 years, since technology has really been strong and really been a sector, right? Pre 30 years ago, technology wasn't even really a portion of the stock market. Now it's such a large portion, it mostly drives the stock market, right? And so because of that, since that in the 30 years, we have not seen interest rates this high, this long. That's the part. Have we seen a couple of spikes? Yes, but it's come back down. The Feds need to cut rates. As soon as they do, within a quarter, we're going to see software development jobs come back. The tax codes that have been changed to make it so that CapEx spending can't be written off entirely is another big hit that we're seeing against corporates. These are the things that are hitting jobs. It's not AI. AI is going to end up bringing more software and IT development jobs than we've ever seen before, because as we start to see these new tools get into the hands of developers, developers are going to develop more, not less. And as they develop more, companies are going to be hungrier for it. They're going to continue to want to. Again, we're seeing, IBM's reporting that only 16% of all AI projects right now have made it to production. What about that other 84%? They're still sitting on a cutting room floor somewhere. Somebody still wants those. They just don't have the money to spend on it because money is so expensive right now. So that's where we're at right now. That is the current state of AI. Here at Startup Hack, we love to train software developers as well as to build custom software solutions for companies. So reach out because we'd love to help. Check out startuphack.com/Spencer, and here's some great information about some of our awesome services.
Hi, my name is Spencer Thomason, and I'm a fractional CTO. With over a decade of executive leadership and a solid 25 years in software development, I've mastered the art of transforming technology teams and products. So what is a fractional CTO? This is where you can contract someone like myself to come into your organization and get the benefits of a seasoned CTO without having to employ me full time. In today's fast-paced world, efficiency, security, and product scaling aren't just goals, they're necessities. My passion is building impactful products and enhancing organizational efficiencies through technology. From startups to small businesses, my approach leverages lean methodologies to not just meet but exceed your strategic goals. Whether it's through executive mentoring, cloud system architecture, or launching a minimum viable product swiftly, my aim is to make a significant impact right from the start. Recognized in the Arizona startup ecosystem, my journey has been about creating value and fostering innovation. I have led technology for companies like GoDaddy, SRP, and Wells Fargo and turned challenges into milestones. I've taken this learning and launched 7 of my own brands, and now I want to help you. So if you're looking for a fractional CTO who brings a wealth of experience, strategic vision, and a proven track record, let's connect. Together we can build technology that not only drives your business forward, but also makes a difference. Technology leadership redefined to fit your needs. So reach out today.